This radical here means heart. The communists did this and left us with a simplified character for love. It was truly heartless.
I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it without telling you too much about it. But even if you just looked at this one example, if you had no other examples, this already is enough to discredit China Uncensored and show you that this guy is a hack. This guy is doing a dishonest hatchet job. So, do you notice he tells you what one of the components in the character represents? He tells you what one of them represents. There are some other components there visible on screen, right? And he doesn't, for some reason, he only tells you that one of the symbols represents the human heart. What do you think that is directly below it? What do you think that is and why he doesn't mention it? In the traditional character, that's a foot. F-O-O-T. That's a human foot. And this is one of the Kangxi radicals. It's referred to as a go radical, walking radical, but some people call it the foot radical. It's a pictograph of a foot. So I notice if your theory was that this amendment to the language is to try to brainwash the Chinese people, do you think that before, in the earlier period before communism, everyone in China was a foot fetishist and there was some kind of powerful association between love and feet, and then they got rid of the foot, and what did they replace it with? Well, of course, that's the character all level 1 students learn in Chinese, as in pengyou, basically meaning friendship. So you could give a completely different interpretation of even the simplification of just this one character and say, no, it's not that they're removing a heart and replacing it with friendship. They're removing a foot and replacing it with friendship. So maybe that's an improvement to the character. Guys, if we're going to criticize communism, let's do it honestly. Let's do it on the level. Let's not do it bullshitting the audience this way. What up, my people? One of the very few sources you can go to for news, politics, and history of China, analysis of things Chinese, is a YouTube channel called China Uncensored. And they have an associated podcast. They have a whole little empire here on the internet. And in a sense, I encourage it because there is almost nothing else you can possibly watch or listen to. But unfortunately, I am in the position of being a critic of the content they're producing, both politically and in terms of what they have to say about the Chinese language. So obviously, I'm a white Western male. I did not grow up speaking Chinese. I've now studied Chinese for several years. After studying a number of other Asian languages, I have both more practical ability in the language than the guy who runs this channel, and much more of a technical understanding of the history of the language, the writing system it's built on, so on and so forth. And if you dial back, you're going to see videos discussing that on this channel from 5 years ago, when I first started hacking into written Chinese and system. But let's not get too technical here. The only other disclaimer I have to offer before we talk about the particular examples is that I am in no way a pro-communist person. I am in no way a supporter of the Communist government of China. Both of my parents were communist. I was raised communist, but I rejected communism. And in the decades since then, I'm an old man with a beard now, as you can see, I have researched and written essays about the history and politics of communist countries. Not just China, but sure, especially China. It's been a big part of my life. So it's a rare combination. There are people who are pro-communist or communist sympathizers, but most of the people who are anti-communist don't really know a lot about communism. And because of my background, I guess I have the worst of both worlds in some ways and the best of both worlds in others. All right, let's take a look at what this guy says about simplified versus traditional Chinese.
George Orwell's classic 1984, the totalitarian party creates Newspeak, a modified form of English created to control how people think. It was double plus good. In mainland China, the Communist Party dramatically changed the traditional written language that had been used throughout much of Chinese history. They replaced it with simplified Chinese characters. So for instance, this is the traditional Chinese character for love. This radical here means heart. The communists did this and left us with a simplified character for love. It was truly heartless. The idea of modifying Chinese characters didn't start with the Chinese Communist Party, but Mao Zedong originally wanted to take it to an extreme. So technically, if you can read traditional characters, you can read anything written in the past 2,000 years. Simplified characters, on the other hand, first came into use in the 50s. The Communist Party had only recently seized control over the mainland and began systematically eradicating traditional Chinese culture, replacing it with communist ideology. So in a precursor to the Cultural Revolution, which saw the destruction of the four olds, old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas, they targeted the writing system first. You see, Chinese characters, or what was now being called traditional Chinese characters, contain within them the traditional culture and thought of China. Each character tells a story.
You guys might imagine I'm like super hyped to jump on this topic. Like I was really enthusiastic to make a video debunking or counteracting this kind of hysterical misrepresentation of what the difference between simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese is. I'm not at all. I really hate making this kind of infomercial or edutainment on the Chinese language. It is not rewarding for me in any way. It only makes you enemies. It never makes you friends. But I actually had a conversation with a colleague who has a PhD and is generally a pretty intelligent person. And I was just stunned by, how the language barrier was really made even worse, even more mysterious by her fundamental confusion about what traditional Chinese is, what simplified Chinese is, and what the relationship between them is. So look, guys, here it is real simply. This kind of hysterical, ridiculous theory that simplification was created in order to cut off the Chinese people from a meaningful connection with their own history and heritage. Okay, how does that work with the example you see on screen now, right? So that insect, okay, before there were three little symbols, the same radical, meaning insect or vermin, sometimes snake. It's that kind of character. Okay, and then the simplified version, there's just one. So what are you going to tell me? How is this mind control again? How is this like George Orwell's 1984? Remember your original hypothesis there on this dude? How is this cutting people off from their heritage? No, this is simplification in the truest sense of the word. That's all there is to it. Here's a Kuai Le. The second character is simplified. The first one stays the same. What am I going to tell you? I personally really dislike the simplified character. I don't think it really saves you much time in terms of your handwriting, not once you're good at Chinese penmanship. I think it's ugly. It's needlessly abstract. I mean, the first symbol is pretty close to meaningless, but the simplified one is even more meaningless. So it's not really an improvement. It just seems like a really ugly, clunky shorthand for the real character. But nevertheless, it's just a simplification. There's nothing more to be said about it than that. There's no secret psychological theory you can transpose on it. It's not deleting the heart out of love. It's not, there's no ideological agenda here. You have got to be kidding me. It's taking a complex character and trying to reduce the number of brushstrokes. You guys can probably tell I'm trying to give you as few examples as possible in as efficient a manner as possible. We could do hundreds. We could look at all kinds of examples and focus just on the meaninglessness of simplification. What I'm trying to point out to you here is that even when it may seem meaningful and when it may seem politically motivated, normally if you do a little bit more research into the etymology and history of these, shorthand forms, it turns out that it is not political and of no symbolic significance whatsoever. So these are two different characters used to mean country, and in historical context it sometimes means kingdom. I have heard people try to politicize this simplification in the same way that China Uncensored so dishonestly misrepresents the history of the character, meaning love, as if, the modification of love is some evil conspiracy to control the minds of the Chinese people. Really doesn't make sense. Well, some people would tell you that the older character for country here has an image of a weapon, like a halberd, that you have to defend your country with weapons, and that then the simplified character instead inside has the symbol meaning jade, a type of precious stone, and that this is some kind of political conspiracy. Now, actually, the symbol that's on the inside of the traditional character for country, you will know from Hoja, meaning like perhaps, can just mean or. The English word or Can also be more like perhaps in English. But here's the terrible truth. By contrast, here we have 3 different symbols that all mean turtle or tortoise. If you use your imagination, you can actually see that the traditional character really is a picture of a tortoise. On the right-hand side, there's the shell, and there's the tail at the bottom. At the top is the head, 2 eyes and a horn. And then on the left-hand side, you can actually see 2 claws poking out, right? So it is actually a pictograph of a tortoise. Then you look at the simplified character, you think, what is that? Where did they get that from? Well, the answer is the simplified character is very clearly influenced by the Japanese character. So the Japanese have their own tradition of simplifying characters and of codifying simplifications of characters. In most cases, not all, but in most cases, the Japanese version of a character was just selected from some writing methodology that existed somewhere in China at some period of time. Sometimes there are innovations that took place in Japan. But guess what? When we come back and look at the different symbols for country, yeah, it seems so political, but guess what? In Japan, they use both symbols. And this idea of putting jade in a box as a simplification has been around in Japan since forever. So if it has any kind of psychological or symbolic significance, you can't blame the Communist Party for it. See how that works? This is normal Chinese handwriting in as much as anything can ever be called normal in Chinese handwriting. If you can read Chinese, you'll actually be able to tell the exercise I was engaged in here is relevant to what we're discussing in the video. I learned Chinese in Kunming, China, and I've been practicing the transition from using the mainland communist simplified standard to using traditional characters because we're moving to Taiwan. So I did actually study traditional characters in the past also when I first started learning Chinese. That's what I was using. But the bulk of my Chinese education was in mainland China. So this is actually communist propaganda. Then I was transcribing it from standard Chinese into traditional Chinese. If you were to ask, what is the best Chinese writing system to learn? The answer is both. I'm interested in the study of politics, history, etc. So I want to know the standard used in communist China also, even if I'm just going to engage in a criticism of what's going on in communist China. Here's the thing. This may look intimidating. And if you just count the number of brushstrokes, which is what most of these dictionary programs will do for you, you think, oh, this is going to take forever. The truth is, once you get used to Chinese writing conventions, there really isn't a perceptible difference in the amount of time. There just isn't. You get used to it. Yeah, once in a while you can find an extreme example of a character where the simplification really saves you some time, but the crushing irony is once you're used to it, you're used to it, and it just never seems to me. For example, a really benign example, all right, to study. Do I really feel I'm saving a significant amount of time if instead we use the simplified standard? No, I don't. And finally, this is what most people would give as a positive example, but to me it's a horrible example. This is shu, tone 1. So if we're really doing like school teachers' tones here, we exaggerate the tones. Shu! Sounds ridiculous. It's not the way people really speak Chinese, but that's how people say it in front of the blackboard to make the tone clear. Okay, so this is shu as in book. And actually the traditional character on the left is meaningful. If you understand it radical by radical and brushstroke by brushstroke, and you understand the etymology, it is a meaningful pictograph. And it has been reduced to a meaningless shorthand for that pictograph. So I think that's really regrettable. I think that's a step in the wrong direction. So look, guys, I'm totally biased in favor of what China Uncensored is doing here. I'm biased in their favor, but still, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to lie to myself. And I am calling you guys out for creating cynical, dishonest, misleading political propaganda on the internet that is no better than anything the Communist Party has done. It is just as bad and worse than a lot of things you criticize the Communist Party for. When the Communist Party comes out with propaganda or a slightly slanted version of events, if you're out here saying that you answer to a higher standard, then I challenge you. You should delete those videos, you should retract it, and when you have time, no rush, when this question of the simplification of Chinese comes up, you should tell the goddamn truth. Because if you don't, you're no better in this respect at least, than the people you criticize.
Dun, 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 dun.